Station, where our veterans' voices are heard. MBR Talk.
Hey, thanks for supporting our channel by watching and listening.
Find us on the web at mbradio.us.
Hi, my name is Daryl, and I'm a veteran.
Hey, I'm Travis. I'm an Air Force veteran.
Hey, my name's Jonathan, and I'm a veteran.
Hi, my name's Ashley, and I'm a veteran.
My name is Chad, and I'm a veteran.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Conversations with a Vet, and my name is Carolee. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there, those who have stepped up and taken on the role of father. We thank you very, very much. I have a wonderful guest who's waiting in the wings, but before we get to my guest tonight, I'd like to read a letter from his son, and so here is a little backstory. I was raised by a single bachelor, a man that was an Army Ranger and a Special Forces Green Beret. So in simple terms, I was raised by a gangster. When he was in a war zone, I stayed with some really good, normal families. But when he was home, he didn't want to spend a second away from me. I was his boy, and I was his world. I looked at my dad like he was a superhero. I hope my son looks at me the same way. Of course, there were some dark times. Nobody's perfect. When you go from getting into gunfights, getting blown up and killing bad guys one week to the next week, coming back to a normal society and a little boy you haven't seen in 8 months, I can't imagine anyone handling everything perfectly. That's an experience I'd say very few men can relate to. I wouldn't trade the crazy, fun, hard, and unique childhood I had with my dad for anything. My dad was my hero. He adored me, and I adored him. If the little me back then could see the man I've become, I know he would be proud. A lot of who I am came from both the good times and the dark times with my old man. Being raised by a warrior isn't for most, but it was right for me. If you saw my dad running at the track or on the road somewhere and his little boy out there running too, for the most part, it wasn't punishment. It was just a son wanting to be like his dad. A chimp following a gorilla. I was blessed with an amazing family and people in my life that really love and care about me. And today, it's about the old man. I wouldn't change a thing. Love you, Dad. Happy Father's Day. And with that, I would like you to please help me welcome Lee Deckelman to the stage.
Thanks for having me back on. I appreciate it.
It's wonderful to see you again. You're looking good.
Yeah, you look great too.
Thank you. Got the message.
Like I said, I've been in bed for 2 days with the stomach flu, so I appreciate you saying that. The camera must filter out the way I feel.
It usually does, right? That's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
So I want to say thank you for coming on the show on Father's Day of all things. And, you've been a guest previous. So for anybody who is interested in going back and taking a look at the original interview that I did with you, they can do so. Go out to my YouTube channel, Conversation with a Vet, and search Lee Deckelman, and you will see the original interview. But we're going to start at the beginning, and we're going to work our way through and see where you are at today. So tell me a little bit about who Lee was as a child.
So I was born in 1966 at Sinai Hospital in Baltimore, Maryland. And the way that happened was my mother was from Tennessee, and she went up to Baltimore to stay with her brother who was in the Army. and stationed up there in Maryland, and met my father. And so when I was born, I was 2.5 months premature. My mother had RH blood, RH negative, and my father was O positive. So prior to 1968, if you had that combination, you pretty much didn't survive. And so I was in an incubator for about 2.5 months and blood
Wow.
transfusions and all kinds of things. So I weighed about 4 pounds. And, it's during that era, it's just kind of cool that I made it. And so it was a fight from the beginning for me. So, I went to foster care. My mother got really sick as a result of that, postpartum, and she got mentally unwell after having me. And so it took about 6 years for my father and my mother to return and get me from foster care. And just a couple years after that, we moved to Tennessee, which is where my mother and all her people are from, is where I am right now in Coffee County, Tennessee. And at about age 9, my dad died of a heart attack, and we had only been here a few days. So I talked funny because I was from up north. Nobody knew who Lee Deckelman was. There was no Deckelman. And in a small little, Christian town, your last name meant everything. And, my father was Jewish and he was raising us Jewish. So it was like I was on another planet. Like it was, survival mode. So we bounced around. I think in the fourth grade, I went to it was 5 or 6. Between fourth and fifth grade, I went to 5 or 6 different schools in that
Wow.
one year, and ended up my fifth grade year in Tullahoma, which is where I graduated high school from, and basically where I've called home. And so those first few years after my father had passed away, there was no violence or nothing crazy in the home. I didn't experience anything like that in my foster care, anything like that. But after my father died, there was a lot of abuse in the home, a lot of neglect. My mother didn't have a driver's license. She didn't have a job. The insurance money took a year to pay out. And so she just went from one boyfriend's house to another. And by the time I was age 14, there was a scenario that I go into great detail in the book, where I was old enough to where, I'd gone without food for a couple of days, that I called my grandmother. And, you would think nowadays it's just common sense. Why didn't you call your grandma? It's like, that's just not the way things were back then. And, you just didn't knowledge that you do today. And so I broke down and called my grandmother, and she came over and brought a bag full of groceries. And during that time, my mother showed back up, and they got into this big argument. And, I was like 14, so I wasn't worried about my mother physically beating me anymore, because it had about a year prior to that, she had stopped doing that. I had got mature enough, and she just kind of knew she physically couldn't beat me anymore. And so I really wasn't worried about it. I just felt bad for my grandmother, who I loved dearly. And so as soon as my grandmother left, it just got really quiet. So the routine is, just be non-confrontational. She's not mad at me. She'll take a couple pills and go to sleep. That was kind of the
Wow.
standard. As long as she wasn't mad at me, she wasn't going to take it out on me.
Right.
But that's what I thought. So, but she was mad at me. She was mad at me because I called my grandmother. So I'm sitting at the dining room table, and I've got 2 turkey pot pies in the oven, and I hear we always had dirty dishes piled up in the sink. We didn't live nice. And I heard her rustling around, and then she just started screaming, and I turned around and she was coming at me with a butcher's knife. So I was able to get out the door while she was chasing me and, run to the street and get away from her. And then I walked, it was like 3.5 miles to my grandmother's house. And of course, she already knew what the situation was at my house. She had just left it crying, bawling her eyes out. So she took me in for a little bit, but that led to my having to go live with my uncle. So once again, I moved again.
Yeah.
Different school in the ninth grade. And so that was kind of how things were. The positive parts of that was, I learned a lot of survival, coping skills. I love sports. I loved outdoors, and my dad was really good at football, and so I just really wanted to be good at football. And but I was really small. I was always the smallest kid in my class, and so I had to work really hard to be good at football. And so that's what I focused all my demons, however you want to put it.
Right. Yeah.
And when high school was over, I was lost. I didn't have the grades or the discipline to do well in college. I didn't have the size or the talent to go to the next level in football. And so there were no jobs in, the Tullahoma, Coffee County area in 1984. Really no jobs at all. And so I joined the Army.
And so you decide that that's what you're going to do. And tell me briefly what it was like for you first getting there. Was it what you expected? Were you shocked about the yelling, the type of discipline, any of that?
So going to basic training was a promotion for me. So the scream, like, it was kind of funny to me how they acted. I got 3 meals a day, even though, Fort Benning was hot. I went there, June, July, August, it was hot, and wearing wool socks, I didn't realize, that that would make my ankles break out, and, wearing this, like, suit in the summertime. You got like a t-shirt, then a long sleeve, thick. We didn't have summer weight BDUs or uniforms back then. So, it's kind of uncomfortable at first, but once you got those old combat boots broke in, literally the old Vietnam combat boots. And once you kind of got used to the weather with all that extra kind of gear and clothing on, everything else was adventurous to me. Obstacle courses, challenging, that was my life. I enjoyed that kind of stuff. And but there was a period where I was homesick, but it wasn't really homesick as much as it was, I left my girlfriend and
Right.
was missing her. And but in about 6 weeks I got a letter, and that took care of that. Most people refer to that as a Dear John letter. And so I didn't, I wasn't missing home anymore.
So tell me about you get through that, you go through AIT, what happens for you after that? Kind of paint me a picture on your
Yeah, well,
endeavors.
it's atypical because I was part of a cohort infantry unit. And so if you Google that, cohort infantry unit, it was a concept that the Army was testing out during that time, where they took an entire company in basic training. They stayed together through AIT, and every one of them went to their first duty station together. So my first unit in the 9th Infantry Division in Fort Lewis, Washington, the NCOs and officers had just come back from the DMZ in Korea.
Oh, wow.
And so there were no privates or Spec 4s in that group. we filled those ranks as a company. So when I first got to Fort Lewis, Washington, we did a 13-week, forget what they call it. It was like a workup, but we went to the field every week for 13 weeks. So we would march out to the training area with all of our stuff, and then we would march back in that Friday morning, spend all Friday, clean our weapon gear, whatever, get off whenever we were done. And when we would do the same thing on Monday. So, it was tough. Like I was like, holy cow, man, this infantry stuff is hard. And I think typically what happens is you or maybe a handful of people would go to a duty station and you would just be the new guys. But I was kind of lucky because all of us were the new guys. So as long as you weren't the weak link, you didn't get any negative attention. So in that sense, it was good. You weren't the new guy. But typically what's going to happen when you get out of AIT is you're going to go become the new guy. And I know the Army's changed a lot with how they treat people, but if you go to the infantry or Ranger Battalion or something like that as the new guy, that's when the real work's going to start.
Right.
Everything's pretty easy until you get to that point. That's when things are really going to get. So if you think things are hard before that, you're really going to struggle.
Yeah, I guess so. So, okay, so you go through your AIT and then you find your PDS, your permanent duty station, or where do you end up?
Yeah. So, but here's what the problem was is I thought, excuse me, I thought I signed a contract to go to 2nd Ranger Battalion in Fort Lewis, Washington, but I went to an infantry unit and, a cohort infantry unit. Well, I didn't know what any of that meant. I was just told by the recruiter that I was an 11 Bravo going to Fort Lewis, so I would be a Ranger. And I thought it was that simple. And that's not how it works. So I spent the next year doing everything I could to try to get over to 2nd Ranger Battalion. And there's a whole chapter in my book about this. And I ultimately, I didn't get into Ranger Battalion then. I did later, but I didn't get into Ranger Battalion then. But during the time I was in, you could do a stateside swap. So if you found somebody at Fort Campbell, for example, that was the same rank, same MOS, that wanted to go to Fort Lewis, and you're at Fort Lewis and you wanted to go to Fort Campbell, you just swap as long as your company commanders signed off on it. No expense to the government. You just fly home and they fly home and you do the swap. Nice. So we were in California. I think it was Hunter Liggett, California, training with the 101st Airborne. And we were sitting around, chasing squirrels and goofing off and eating MREs on a break. And one of the guys there asked if anybody would be interested in going to Fort Campbell because his family was from Seattle and he really wanted to get reassigned. And this is exactly, I remember this conversation. This is exactly what I said. I said, does Ranger slots? And he said, oh, yes. And I said, I'll do it. That was it. And that's what we did. So I went to Fort Campbell. You had to be in the Scouts to get a Ranger slot. So as soon as I got to Fort Campbell, I tried out for Scouts, made it in the Scouts. And next month, I had to be an E4 to go to Ranger school. I think you could be an E3 from Ranger Battalion, but from any other unit, I think you had to be an E4. But regardless, next month I made E4 and went to Ranger school. And so I graduated Ranger school, and I decided to get out because I was kind of burned out, disappointed. I really wanted to go to Ranger Battalion. Now I'm an E5 with a Ranger tab. Nobody wants to go to Ranger Battalion as an E5. You want to pay your dues, and work your way up to get that kind of respect. And nobody really wants to be what they call an import. And so,
Yeah.
and during that time, to be quite honest with you, everybody in, I thought about being a Green Beret. I was told when the movie First Blood, Rambo come out, that you had to be 6 foot tall to be a Green Beret. So I just dismissed it. There was no internet back
How
then
tall
or
are
no way
you?
of finding out the truth.
How
I'm
tall are
five
you?
six, five
Okay.
six. So, so I just dismissed it. But when I got in the Army, I found out that that wasn't true. Um, and but during that time, the groups, all the groups, if you were assigned a group, so if you were support, if you were a mechanic, if you were a nurse, if you were whatever, you could wear a Green Beret. So the only way to distinguish a real Green Beret from somebody that wasn't a Green Beret, because everybody wore the Green Beret, was if they had the Special Forces tab. And so what people would do on post is they would wear the Green Beret and put their Gore-Tex jacket on, so you couldn't tell if they were a real Green Beret or a fake Green Beret. So I'm literally going into the PX at Fort Campbell, the old PX, and as I'm getting ready to go in, a pregnant female with her Gore-Tex jacket, bulged out because she was pregnant, and a Green Beret come walking out. And I had like 6 months left in the Army, and I was like, I'm out, man. I'm out. I'm not interested in being a Green Beret, or I'm just, and so I just got out the first time. That was the first time I was in. But that's the
Uh,
truth. That's what it came down to.
that's nuts. That is absolutely nuts.
Yeah, they
So,
changed it a couple years later back. It was nuts that they did that, but that's what they did. But it was nuts that they took the black beret from the Rangers and made it a tan beret. One general had a problem with the Rangers, decided to do that, and then that changed history. So
wow.
everybody's cool with it now, but it wasn't very cool when it happened.
So tell me about now you had been deployed overseas. So tell me about where you went and what that was like for you after, of course, growing up and living in the US.
So like deploying overseas, like well, I didn't deploy overseas in my first enlistment.
Hmm.
So my first deployment overseas was Desert Storm, when I got reactivated for Desert Storm. And then I decided to just go back in the Army and went to 1st Ranger Battalion, and we would go overseas then. So my first overseas deployment was 8 months during Desert Shield, which became Desert Storm.
And so when you first get there and you get off the plane, were you shocked about the terrain and the weather and any of that? Or did you guys train for that while you were here in the States?
No, so most units, active duty units, have a real good train up, and they have a good idea what to expect. I got activated with a National Guard unit, so we basically just did some basic weapons qualification stuff, and no training at all, and
Wow.
just some individual training, and got on a plane and flew over there with no real idea even what our mission was going to be. So if you haven't been to combat, the first time you go, it's just all these unknowns. So, most people are type A, and you're filling all these blanks, and it's just, there's a lot of unknowns. So you just try to stay calm, and just try to not get too stressed out. And, luckily, if you're in a unit where you can trust your leadership, which I wasn't. So, when we first got there, the first thing I noticed was just how hot it was. Like when we came off the aircraft, I thought, man, the engines of that aircraft are just burning us up. But the further we got away from it, the temperature didn't change. And I was like, oh shit, that's not the engine from the aircraft. That's
Wow.
just the air and the wind blowing. And so, it takes weeks to climatize to that. And so that was the first few weeks for us. Was we were in Daharan in what they call Tent City. It was just on the end of the runway. And so 24 hours a day, the jets were taking off landing 24 hours a day. We were right at the end of the runway with no mission in these tents, no air condition, no fans, no anything. And so we were just climatizing just like animals.
Wow.
You're just sitting around killing flies, drinking water, and at nighttime it'd be 100 degrees, and you're just laying
Wow.
there. It's just so that was the first phase, and then it was they had one mess hall in all of Daharan at that time, and so you would go wait in line for hours, and so what you would do is you'd go wait in line and have breakfast, or they serve 2 meals a day. And then, if you didn't have anything going on, you just turn right around and hang out there and wait in line to be at the front of the line for the second meal. So it was really just, kind of animalistic. Just, it was all about staying in the shade, trying to stay hydrated, climatizing, and just focused on eating.
Right.
So
And
that
yeah.
was that was in the beginning, and once we kind of got going, um, I was part of a base defense liaison team, so we would go to soft units, not infantry combat arms unit, but we would go to soft units where they had just set up these little bases all over the place that weren't secure, and we'd just go advise them um, um, of ways to, there'd be like an MP, an infantry guy, which I was, in these base defense liaison teams, and we would just go advise. And ultimately, I wound up in Riyadh and Escon Village, which anybody that was stationed in Riyadh during that time probably knows Escon Village. There was an Air Force side that was squared away and everything else. And then there was an Army side that was just unsecure. And so General Fricks, he was a 1-star at the time, um, had put down that he wanted a base defense liaison team. So the colonel I was working for, since I was already Ranger qualified, I was like the only Ranger qualified guy that, that I saw the whole time I was down there. So he just tasked me with that, gave me a field promotion to E6. So I would be the highest ranking guy working on it. And I put together a base defense plan and briefed General Fricks, and he goes, "Let's do it." And that's what we did
Nice.
until about 6 weeks later the war was over. So then we all went back to Kobar Towers, which would be the later a site for a terrorist attack. But back then it was just this kind of little city of living spaces that were abandoned, nobody lived in, and so we went back to Kobar Towers and just waited for a flight home.
Nice.
Oh, and I can't talk about that without talking about this. The highest ranking person to die during Desert Storm was Lieutenant Colonel Joe Hancock, and that was our commander. So that was how bad this unit was. He killed
Oh.
himself.
Oh, goodness gracious. That's
Yeah.
never good.
And I don't mean that to sound disrespectful, but our commander, a lieutenant colonel, before the war even started, took his own life. So
I'm
it
sorry to
was
hear
it
that.
was a National Guard unit, and it was
Do you
just
know
total
out of what
chaos.
state? Do you know out of what state they were out of?
Tennessee, yeah, it was the
Oh, they were
130th
here out of.
Rayok.
Oh,
Yeah, it
okay.
was
Okay.
130th Rayok out of Smyrna, Tennessee.
That's sad.
I don't know if that unit still exists. And there were some great people in that unit. Captain Chuck Thomas, who went on to become, like a major at the sheriff's Murfreesboro, and there was a few other great people in that unit, but the top leadership was rubbish.
Well, I hate
Yeah.
that for you, but I'm glad you're here with us today to be able to tell your story. So, okay, so you were there, and then you got to come back stateside after, or did you just stay
Yeah,
for a
yeah.
second?
So came home after 8 months. I had just got married before I left. And I told my wife, I was like, if they're just gonna activate me if that's the new thing, I want to be in a unit, a warfighting unit. So I joined the 20th Special Forces Group, the
Wow.
Green Beret Guard unit in Decatur, Alabama.
Wow.
Yeah,
And
and
how difficult was that to get on board with?
it wasn't it wasn't hard to get in the unit. I think it's a little harder now. I think they have a selection process now to just get in the unit. Um, I don't know if it was because I was Ranger qualified or because I was a Desert Storm veteran, but for whatever reason, it wasn't hard to get in the unit. But then you had to compete for a selection slot, for SFAS. The first stage of becoming a Green Beret is, a 21-day selection course at Camp McCall at Fort Bragg. And so you do a train up. So every month you go for, it was like 2.5 days, really, not 2 days, but you would go on Friday night and leave on Sunday evening. And all you would do is train for selection if you weren't a Green Beret. The Green Berets did their separate training, their team training, and then what they called the NQPs, the non-qualified personnel, would do their training. And so I got some really good training when I went to selection. I did so well during selection that one of the guys, when we come back from the events, you have team events, and they're kind of, it's a leadership challenge, these team events. So say today, I get picked to be the leader, and my task is to do this, apparatus, move this apparatus from here to there. Let's say it's 10 clicks, or 5 clicks or whatever. I'm getting evaluated on how I manage my team, putting this apparatus together, getting it down the road, and you're doing it at the same time all these other teams are doing. So you can look around and see how you're doing, right? If like 2 or 3 teams have already moved out with their apparatus and you're still halfway done with yours, you can figure you're probably not doing too good. Or if you're halfway down the road and your apparatus falls apart and you get passed by everybody, figuring I'm not doing too good. But other than that, you don't get any kind of feedback. You don't have any watches. You take all your instructions from a chalkboard. And so there's no encouragement, there's no corrections, there's no anything. So it's on you. So after I had already been graded on mine and we were towards the end of team week, one of the guys was asking me questions because he thought I had been recycled because I was so knowledgeable about the apparatuses and how to put them together because of the training I had got at 20th Special Forces Group, that he thought I had already been through the course and was
Right.
asking me advice about something. I was like, no, I wasn't. He said, they called it a 21-day non-select. And I was like, no, this is my first time going through, brother.
Nice. So how many tours overseas while you were in the military did you serve?
I went, so I flew over to Desert Storm, because when I flew over to Desert Storm, within the first month or two, I got a Red Cross letter that my mother had killed herself. And so I had to fly home, but I didn't have any information on how she had died. So once I got home, I found out that, she had remarried, this big abusive alcoholic, and he would beat her. And this had gone on, and there's a lot of this in the book. I was 17 years old and ran him off with a shotgun because of it and stuff like that. So there was a lot of violence. I grew up around a lot of violence and around a lot of mean people. And so she finally just went to a pawn shop and got a pistol and shot him and killed him and then killed herself. So I came home, and as soon as she was in the ground, I was in touch with my command on getting a flight back over. And so I think I was home a total of 2 weeks, and the Tullahoma National Guard, who I knew several people in that unit, like Kenny Banks, for example, was flying over. And so I got to fly back over 2 weeks later them and reassimilate with my unit. Other than that, other than that, I didn't have any combat deployments with the military, but I did have overseas deployment with Ranger Battalion, like Cobra Gold 95, where the American Rangers trained with the Thai Rangers, and that was really interesting deployment. But all my other combat rotations and tours were working for the government through contracting companies.
Yeah, and so
So,
that's
like for
actually, I wanted
example,
to get into that actually, is, you were a security contractor and,
well, the first, oh, I'm sorry.
oh, no, you're good. Go ahead.
The first contract I was on as an original triple canopy member, we were GS-15s. So we had CAC cards, GS-15s. We were officially, you know, I guess it was DOD. Yeah, DOD. I get all that stuff mixed up now that I'm 60, but
Still a youngin'.
I still got the ID. I still got the ID card. But yeah, after that, I bounced around. I did diplomatic. I was on a diplomatic passport with USIS ATA program, the Anti-Terrorist Assistant Program. And I'm just going to run through it, and we can back
Yeah,
up and
yeah.
and break those down. And then I bounced around to like EOD corporate, SOC. Blackwater, Tiger Swan, Olive Group. So in the contracting world, contracts can end in 1 month or 1 year or 3 years. You do a lot of bouncing around, and you just change a lot of cheap t-shirts, but it's still the same type of work, usually with a lot of the same guys. And so I cut my teeth in that world after being an air marshal. So when I got medically retired from the Army, um, I went to work as a 911 paramedic because I was a special forces medic, and that was the only qualification that I had at the time. And so it was just an easy transition. So the next day after I got out of the Army, I was working in Rutherford County, Murfreesboro, Tennessee, as a 911 paramedic. And I did that until a buddy of mine talked me into joining the Air Marshals, after 9/11. And I did that for a couple years, and then I took that initial contract. I was a contract with Triple Canopy, which was to highlight everything that I learned in the military, prepared me for that, and I'm so thankful because I was in Ramadi, Iraq in 2004, 2005 with Triple Canopy, and it was real, you know,
Yeah.
the fighting there, and it was real.
Now, I had the opportunity to speak not only to yourself, but to interview also a couple of your teammates as well that were doing the same kind of thing. And,
Yeah, Elvis,
you know, the stories
Elvis and
that,
Tadpole.
yes, yes. And so, I mean, and just getting to know them on the show here, and reading their books, etc., as well as yours, it's really a great insight into the type of personalities that you get introduced to. And like you said, you're all A-type personalities, right? So
Yeah,
were there
yeah.
times that you felt like you were button heads because you're all very strong-minded individuals?
That happens once the leadership weakens, that happens. But no, that didn't happen. Our team was Team Miami, and that didn't happen.
Nice.
It was there. That was a team of professionals. The selection process to get on that team was something else. It was Triple Canopy was organized and ran by former Delta Force operators, and that's how they handled their business. And if you were in those first groups going over there, you didn't get sent over there unless it was somebody they would go to war with. And so the standards, it was a tier 1 standard. So the guys in 2004 that were part of Team Miami, no, there wasn't any headbutting. Everybody worked hard to be a good teammate, and that's the way it works in that environment. If you have, if you have to be pushed, you go home. You want the kind of guys that you have to kind of rein in, try to slow them down. You don't, if you've got to motivate somebody to do their job, and I'll give you an example, and I'm not going to give you high speed examples. Like, you're in charge of a vehicle. Well, before you go to bed at night, before that next day mission, you should check the air pressures. You should make sure the spare or both spares aren't flat. You should make make sure the jack didn't leak hydraulic fluid, and when you pull it out, it's not going to work. You should make sure all the windshields are clean. So you see where I'm going with that?
Yep.
The fuel's topped off, everything. So you have to be a professional. You have to take pride in your job. It's not, and I'm going to say this, and it may make people, but it's not the Navy SEAL approach where it's like you just work out in the gym, you look good, you put on a bunch of cool stuff, and you just run into battle. It's not that. It's the meticulous preparation. It's the little things that aren't cool that you do so that you don't get caught with your pants down. And if you do get into trouble and things don't work out, you did everything you could to mitigate it. And
Right.
and you can know from a leadership standpoint that you did everything you could to mitigate whatever happened in that scenario. And so it was the highlight of my life. Um, that was um, that was a very special time with a very special group. Now, most of all the other teams or anything I was on, yeah, there was butting heads, and the certain groups from this military group and this, yeah, there was all that, unfortunately. But I think when people are dying every day, people don't think like that. But when the killing stops and the attack stops and everything slows down, people want to get some, right? And
Yep.
there's nothing to get, and so they start getting each other. And so I've seen that on multiple levels. And I went overseas to Iraq and Afghanistan from '04 to '05, all the way to 12 between
Wow.
Afghanistan, and I stopped deploying over there in 12. And I saw what ISIS did. I was living in a hotel in downtown Iraq. I wasn't on a base, and I saw what ISIS did. So yeah,
Mm.
yeah, and I saw the deterioration of the contractor too. The contractors in the beginning, when I started in '04, we went on patrols with 2 4 Marines during the first Battle of Ramadi as contractors. We
Wow.
were one team. It was Team America. By '05, '06, that started deteriorating. By '08, the military hated contractors, and it just kept getting worse and worse. And by 2012, contractors hated contractors, and they were, fighting amongst themselves. So yeah, it was awful. It was really
So
disappointing. But '04 wasn't.
yeah. So tell me about, so you've mentioned it a couple times, and I'm going to show this now. You wrote a book, and it is called Internal Volume, and it's about your time,
Yeah.
basically your life story. Now, when we talked last, you talked about how you have this internal volume, and why don't you briefly kind of go through that for us so that everybody understands what you're talking about?
Yeah, so it's a play on words. Usually when you talk about internal volume, you're talking about space. It's a mathematical geometry type, thing that you're going to be looking at. And it's just a play on words. If you sit in a room for 15 minutes by yourself without your phone, no noise, nothing, and just listen to yourself, you have a volume, right? You have your voices, you talk to yourself. When you've done something that you're ashamed of, your energy is, so the internal volume, the easiest way for me to explain it is if you just think about a knob that goes from 0 to 10, just like your radio knob used to, or whatever. When you peace, like you're just relaxed, say your place is the beach, or maybe somebody's place is a stream in the mountain, or you're having a romantic moment with the person of your dreams, and the world just melts away. When you're in that space of being present, you're at a zero. That's heaven. Okay. When you can't pay attention to anybody, you can't do anything right, you're multitasking, you're all over the place, you can't sleep, you're taking energy drinks just to keep yourself going. Nobody gets to reel you anymore. You may even hate yourself. Your volume's at a 10. You're not living right. You're not living right. You're faking it. You're doing all these other things. And so as I go through my life, the thread through my life, the highs and low, it's just kind of an example of that internal volume, and how yoga taught me through meditation that your internal volume, and talked about this before, your container, my container, we all have different containers that house our soul, who we are, our consciousness, who we really are. And so you can have 5 new vehicles in the driveway. You can date a model. You can make $1 million a year, and your internal volume could still be a 9 every day because you're not happy on the inside. So what I learned through yoga and how this book came about is what's important is how you feel about you on the inside, your own internal volume. And the only way to really know that is to stop worrying about everybody else, stop being the victim and blaming everybody else, to look in the mirror, to take accountability, and just focus on you. And that's what I've been doing, for the last several years. And, with my past, if you read my book, getting over what I've been through in my life is not easy. And rewiring the way I think through neuroplasticity, which this is a great book. If you want to learn something about that, the source from Dr. Schwartz, but rewiring those neural pathways through what you do and what you think about every day. So if you watch dark movies and serial killer shows and whatever, and you kind of, it's interesting to you, well, you're feeding the darkness in you, whether you realize that or not. So what you do every day and what you think about is who you are, and you can change that. And so by just focusing on more positive things, eating better, sleeping better, whatever, you can change the neural pathways, and it'll actually start changing who you are and how you feel about yourself, and you can start controlling that internal volume. So people like me, people from the military, people who don't have a buffer between going from a 1 to a 10, need that. You need that buffer. You need that mindfulness. And so right now, if somebody knocked on the door and started screaming, I'm back in Ramadi. Like I'm ready to kill who's ever on the other side of that door. I'm not thinking, oh, it's somebody with a delivering a pizza. You know, if you start beating on that door and start screaming, I'm automatically going to go to a 10, grab my gun and go to the door. Well, that's not very humane, and that's not very acceptable in this society, and that's not going to get you very far, and that's not going to do you very well in the long term. It's not healthy. And so learning to get that buffer to where somebody beats on the door and go, okay, hold on. Whew. Let me think about this for a second. Just being able to bring yourself back to your body. That's where I'm at right now.
Nice. Now, are you had
And
been a yoga
another great,
instructor? Are you still a yoga instructor?
no, I had an injury almost 2 years ago where the hernia mesh that the Army had put in me just before I got out, there was some nerve damage. It was
Oh no.
causing, I think, because of the yoga, because of the stretching, that generation of hernia mesh doesn't stretch. And so it caused, I couldn't walk right. I thought I needed a new hip. So it took almost 2 years through the VA to get this fixed. And so last week I had that mesh taken out, new mesh put in, thanks to Richard Pierce, Dr. Richard Pierce, the general surgeon at Vanderbilt Hospital. Is only thanks to him that happened. So
Wow.
I went through a painful, maybe as dark a time as I've ever been through the last 2 years because of this. Because when people like us, when you stop moving well, you stop doing well, especially mentally for people
Yeah.
like us. And nobody at the VA, I just kept getting passed around, and months would go by without hearing anything. And I just went up there to Nashville and raised enough hell, and they brought over a doctor from Vanderbilt through community care, and he's the greatest. I mean, I can't be more grateful to the way he treated me and what he did. So that could have happened a year and a half ago, but I had to go through the process. I couldn't do anything about it, and it's unfortunate. But I'm grateful now. And so, yeah, I'm 1 week into recovering from that surgery, and so it's
And
been a
how are
tough
you
week. A
feeling?
couple days ago, I got the stomach virus, so it's been a tough week.
Mm.
So
Is it
I'm
healing up
sorry. What?
okay? Is it healing up okay?
It's wonderful. Wonderful. I think, it takes a few weeks. He clipped all the nerves in there, so it takes a few weeks for those to settle. So, everything looks good down there. You know, I got enough experience with that stuff to know, and so yeah, I was on pain meds for about 2 days and took myself off. I didn't want to get constipated or anything. So, yeah, it's been thanks for asking. But again, I want to shout out to Vanderbilt Hospital, to Dr. Richard Pierce, man. Nothing but
Nice.
love and respect.
Nice. That's a great shout out, actually. They don't get enough credit for the good that they do. So when you find somebody who has gone above and beyond, I think it's wonderful that you do that.
Yeah. Well,
So
you read my book, and you know
I
what
did.
happens. You know what all's happened to me down there, and it's
Yes.
been awful.
It
Yeah.
really has. And being a female, right? So we have different parts. And even I was cringing. So
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
so we're coming up, getting close. We got about 7.5 minutes yet to go. But
Okay.
tell me about if you had somebody come up to you, a young man, young woman, who has said that they are looking to go into the military. First, would you recommend a branch to them? And secondly, any other words of wisdom that you would want to share with them?
Okay. If I was going to recommend a branch, I think the best branch of the military is the Air Force. I think They treat their people the best. I think they have the more intelligent jobs and that translate into better paying jobs once you get out. Um, I think all around the Air Force, and if you want to do high speed stuff and be in special operations, the most heroic thing that during the GWAT was John Chapman, who was an Air Force combat controller who got the Medal of Honor in Tucker Gar at Roberts Ridge. His actions during that day rival any body that I've ever heard of for the Medal of Honor. And that was in the Air Force, and the Air Force PJs, which is another branch of the Air Force operation, is it's no joke. So those are two very special organizations within the Air Force, where if you really want to go be at the tip of the spear, those guys work with the tier 1 units. They're attached to SEAL Team 6, to Delta Force. You want to go work at the tip of the spear and carry your weight and be a real part of the team and have a real future or a real career. I think that's probably, knowing what I know now, the best place to do that. The SEALs have come under a lot of scrutiny during GWAT because of criminal activity. Even Delta Force is not immune to that. With if you look at the book, the Fort Bragg cartel. So there's been some ethical, the moral compass in those organizations has been broken to an extent. To what extent, I don't know. But there's certainly some criminal activities that have been going on in those organizations, and I just can't recommend them anymore. That being said, if you want to go kick doors and do the coolest stuff that, just like Delta does, just like SEAL Team 6 does, and they're good as anybody, that's Ranger Battalion. And Ranger Battalion, to my knowledge, was at the tip of the spear during the entire GWAT, and they didn't get caught up in a lot of that questionable behavior overseas.
Right. So,
But I would also warn them that if you join the military, what the military's job is has nothing to do with what you want or what your family wants or what you need. You're a tool, and it
yeah.
that doesn't they don't say that in their advertisement because nobody would join, but you're a tool. You're an extension of the military. You're a tool that's going to be used in war for an objective. And so, if you don't want to be that, I recommend a trade. That's what I would tell anybody. If I could go back and talk to the 18-year-old Lee Deckelman, my son's an arborist now. He was in Ranger Battalion, got out, and became an arborist. And I would go back and tell my 18-year-old self, work for yourself. Learn how to frame a house. Learn how to plumb or do electricity. Work with your hands. Become an arborist. Work on your terms. Live your life more on your terms. And that's what I would tell myself, looking back now at, and when you look back on GWAT, what we did in Iraq and Afghanistan, it was like, well, what was that for? Nothing's changed. So yeah, it's hard for me to, and a lot of your audience may not be happy with that, but it's hard for me to recommend somebody first not look at a trade. And I don't recommend college. I think that's just a business model to, you're stupid if you don't go to college. I think nowadays you might be stupid if you do go to college, unless you're going to specialize, unless you're going to be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, unless you're going to specialize. If you're going to college just to get a degree, that's a smart move. Go get a trade. And, if that doesn't suit you, if you're just die hard, want to go serve, then yeah, go serve. You can do that proudly. But I can't recommend the SEALs or a unit like Delta Force with the cloud that they have over their head right now. But I can highly recommend the Air Force Ranger Battalion.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So we're going to go ahead and wrap up, but I do want to say to everybody who's out there, if you are interested in, let's put this on the stage here. If you're interested at all in picking up Lee's book, Internal Volume, where a monster and mindfulness become one, you can go right out there to Amazon. And it's a great read. It is true to Lee Deckelman. It's very raw. It is very real. And we want to make sure to support the veterans that are out here putting their stories out there for anybody to read. But we want to also thank them for doing that as well, because it's not always easy to get stories from veterans about their time in the military. And so Lee, I want to say thank you very, very much.
Can I add something real quick?
Please.
Just a couple things. First of all, I want to say the premise of the book is you can be born and come into this world below average, into a world that doesn't want you. And if you work hard enough, you can have an above average life. And that's what I hope my story reflects. And I want to shout out to Tunnels to Tower. I donate to them. What they're doing for veterans is second to none. I want to shout out to SAL, Special Operations Wounded Warrior Program. What they do for Special Operations Wounded Warriors every year with their hog hunt is amazing. If you want to donate to them, and I just want to shout out to the 2-4 and 2-5 Marines that I served alongside in Ramadi with in 2004 during the first Battle of Ramadi and the second Battle of Ramadi. And I just want to thank you again for having me on. And I'm very grateful to still be here and be able to share my story. And I think it's important that we share our stories and that we tell the truth and not try to, lead with our ego and kind of make up stuff, but really tell the truth about what things are like. Yeah.
Well,
so
thank
you very much.
So much. Yeah, it means the world that you come on, and I'm glad that you're doing well and you're on the mend. And I want to say, Lee, if you want to hold tight for me, for everybody else who's watching this, happy Father's Day to all the guys out there that are fathers and those who have stepped into the role and just taken it upon themselves to raise children. Again, thank you all very much for being here. Join me again next week, 6 p.m. Central Time. And everybody have a wonderful rest of your week.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to Military Broadcast Radio. As we wrap up today's show, we want to remind you that the podcast of today's episode will be available right after we go off the air. So if you missed any part of the show or want to listen again, be sure to check it out. And remember, we're here to support and honor our veterans. Your stories and experiences matter, and we are committed to giving you a platform to share them. That's right. We're here to give our veterans a voice. So don't forget to catch the podcast and stay connected with us. Giving our veterans a voice.